Hello there, you're with me Mohit, and this video is the outcome of quite a few requests. Tense is indeed the heart and soul of any language and the common foe of quite a few English language learners. Nonetheless, let's see if we can turn this foe into a friend today. So welcome to the first video in the tense video series. In this video, we take a look at the present simple tense. We begin with its basic concepts, moving on to the common applications, and eventually ending with the advanced uses, thereby making the video suitable for every type of learner. So let the tense game begin. Alright, so before getting into the specifics, I thought it best to devote a moment to the basic concepts as well. So let's just have a look over here. Nothing much to share really, except some basic critical definitions which I'd be utilizing throughout the video. So what do we have? We begin with the first concept, which is the types of sentence. Surely you are acquainted with this already. Nonetheless, never hurts to recap. So we've got essentially three types of sentence. We've got the positive, the negative, and the interrogative. Now, as you know, positive statements are all those statements which are true and in which some events do take place. For example, it rains, she sings, we talk, and so on. As opposed to this, you've got the negative statements in which the events are untrue or they do not happen, they do not take place. Similar examples such as it doesn't rain and she doesn't sing and we don't talk. We don't talk anymore. Charlie Puth, great vocals. Anyway, getting back, we come to the interrogative, the final type of sentence. Now, interrogatives are all your questions in which you seek or you test the validity of the statement, whether it's true or false. So you go ahead and say things like, does it rain? Or does she sing? Or do we talk anymore? So these are the types of sentence. We come to the second concept, which is the personal pronouns. Now, what are personal pronouns? Personal pronouns are all those words which are used in order to express, or rather address, in order to address people or things. You've got pronouns, examples like I, you, we, they, he, she, it, and so on. Again, nothing out of the blue, very common stuff. Although over here, a thing which I always suggest to my students is, and it works well for them, which is that I always advocate the division of the 7 pronouns into 2 sets, which is exactly what we're going to do in this video as well. We'll divide our pronouns into set 1, which will comprise I, you, we, they, and set 2, consisting of he, she, it. Now, the reason behind this division is that in English grammar, the rules of set 1, that is I, you, we, they, are one, while the rules for set 2, which is he, she, it, are another. Although this is not in absolution, you may come across exceptions, so please do not consider it as a rule of thumb, although it will serve you in many instances. And then we come to the final concept, which is the infinitive. Now, this word may sound fancy, but it actually is a very simple concept. What is the infinitive? The infinitive, quite simply, is the verb in its bare basic form, or in its first form. You've got examples such as come, see, go, watch, talk, arrive, and so on. So what is the infinitive? Essentially, it is the verb without the effect of any tense falling upon it in its bare simple form. So there you have it. These are the basic concepts which are going to come in very handy as we go. So let's proceed and get to it, get to the main material, which is the formation of the different types of sentences in the present simple, starting with the positive. Let's begin. Alright, so we begin with the formation of the positive sentence in the simple present with reference to set 1, which is I, you, we, they. Now, the good news over here is that when it comes to set 1, things are very comfortable because the verb is always in its infinitive form. Infinitive, as we've already discussed, is the verb in its bare basic form. Which brings me to the structure of the positive in the simple present. You've simply got the subject followed by the verb in the infinitive, which is another way of saying I, you, we, they, followed by V1, that's the infinitive again. So applying the structure, the sort of simple sentences that you get in the positive are I play, you see, we jump, they wash, and so on. So you've got the pronouns serving as the subjects over here. You've got I, you, we, they as the subjects, followed by the verbs in the infinitive such as play, see, jump, and wash, And that's that. So with that, you have the structure of the positive sentences in the simple present. Now, before proceeding to the negative, I'd quickly like to take up a simple yet indispensable section, I feel, for language learners, which is the subject-verb disagreement. Let's have a look. All right, so we begin with the subject-verb disagreement. Now, what is the subject-verb disagreement? It's a very common error, hence an important topic. Now, it's a situation wherein the verb in the sentence is not in accordance or is not in the right form as per the subject in the very same sentence. Let's take some examples over here. Now, as long as you've got the pronouns in the sentence, I, you, we, they, things are very simple. All you do is you apply the form of the positive sentence over here, you attach the infinitive with that pronoun, and you have simple present sentences such as I eat, you eat, we eat, they eat, and so on. But take away those pronouns and introduce names of people or groups of people in the sentence is when errors begin to happen. Let's take an example of one such error. You've got a wrong sentence over here, Alan and Sarah eats. Now, the reason why that is wrong is that the verb does not agree with the subject over here, Alan and Sarah. Now, in my experience, what I have noticed is that the way students tend to approach such sentences is that they feel since Alan and Sarah is a plural subject, since you've got two people in there, they need to justify the verb over here by turning it into a plural as well. And how do they do it? They do it by attaching an S, which in fact is not the way to go. The reason for that is, my dear friends, what you need to understand over here is that eat or verbs are actions and not quantities, and you cannot convert actions into plurals, not by any method, let alone by adding an S over there. Instead, the legitimate practice over here would be that you take your subject and imagine a situation where you're not allowed to use the names of the people. Instead, you are required to replace those names with a pronoun in the sentence. So how do you do that? The way you do that is that you take Alan and Sarah and you compare them with set 1 and set 2 and see where they make a perfect fit. Now, if I have a look, I instantly feel that the pronoun they is a perfect fit for Alan and Sarah. Why? Let's have a look at that as well. Now, Alan and Sarah do not include me, the speaker, do not include you, the listener. In fact, Alan and Sarah are third party to this conversation between us, which in grammatical terms is the third person plural, which in this case is they. So they is the fitting pronoun for Alan and Sarah over here. So they belongs to set 1. So whatever works for they in set 1 also works for Alan and Sarah in this sentence. And what is that? You've got the infinitive attaching going with they over there. So what do we do? How do we fix this? Since eats is not in the infinitive form, they requires an infinitive. I fix this sentence like so. I remove the S over there. And you got eat, which is the verb in the infinitive form, thereby correcting that sentence. Let's take one more example of such an error. You've got Jake and I travels. Again, the same trouble with the sentence. Now, this time, Jake and I is not going to be the equivalent of they because you've got an I in there. I, the speaker, am included in the context, is included in the subject. Hence, this time, if I am included in something, some group, the group will be a we for me. So whatever works for we, which is right here in set 1, also works for the subject Jake and I. And what is that working for the we? Again, it's the verb in the infinitive form. So let's just fix that again. You take away the S and you're left with the correct sentence over there, which is Jake and I travel. So that's what the subject-verb disagreement is all about, my dear friends, a very common error. So from here on, I believe we can safely move on ahead to the formation of the positive in the simple present with reference to set 2 this time, which is he, she, it. Alright, so now for the formation of the positive sentence in the present simple, this time with reference to set 2. Now things are very comfortable in case of set 1, where all you need to do is attach that infinitive with the subject and you end up with your positive sentence. However, things do tend to take a trickier turn in case of set 2. Luckily, we have some ground rules to help you through that. Initially, you may feel the need to memorize them, but the more you practice them, the more you grow into them and they become second nature. So let's just begin with those rules. rules. So if you've got a sentence in set 2 which begins with a he, she, it, or involves he, she, it as the subject, so the verb following that in most cases will quite simply require the addition of an s towards the end, giving rise to sentences such as he runs, she sees, it jumps, and so on. However, if you got the verb in the sentence ending with an S, with an SH, a CH, an X, or an O, you will need to provide an ES towards the end of that verb. Taking some examples over here, you've got bless ending with an S, we provide the ES, it turns into blesses. We go to wash, wash ends with an SH, so we again provide that ES, wash turns into washes for he, she, it. Then we've got CH, which is in touch, the verb touch, so touch turns into ES for he, she, it. Similarly, mix ending with an X is also provided with an ES, we get mixes, and finally we get go turning into goes because it ends with the O. In fact, this precisely is the reason why we use do in conjunction with I, you, we, they, and does with he, she, it, because do originally ends with the vowel O. So there you have it, another mystery solved, which brings me to the final rule, which is the consonant plus Y rule. Now, what is this rule? Now, whenever in any verb you have the second last letter of the verb as a consonant and is immediately followed by a Y, so the treatment that you provide to that verb is you remove the Y and you add an IES towards the end of it. Let's take some examples here to make that better. You've got the verb, the infinitive verb study. So what do I have as the second last letter? I have the consonant D. It is immediately followed by the Y. So I remove that Y, I add an IES, and I end up with studies. Similarly, for fly, I've got the second last letter as an L, which is a consonant, followed by a Y. I remove that Y, adding an IES, I end up with flies. Similarly, for cries and tries, where the second last letter is the R, which is the consonant, and I remove that Y and I end up eventually with cries and tries. And those are all the rules guiding the usage of the infinitive or the verb in conjunction with he, she, it. Now, it doesn't just end here. I have some extra practice for you, some comparisons, a little recap with the set 1 so that things tend to get a bit clearer. So let's have a look. You've got the set 1 on the left and set 2 on the right. So in set 1, you've got I draw. In set, you have he draws. You've got you relish, she relishes. We watch, but it watches. They fix, but Alan fixes. And finally, Jane and Sarah do, but Jamie does. And that's a little comparison for your help between set 1 and set 2. And now, before proceeding ahead, a quick note on the subject-verb disagreement with reference to set 2 as well. You've got some wrong sentences over here. My father watch movies. Now, watch. Now, why is this incorrect? Because watch, the verb is in its infinitive form. And the infinitive form, as we've already discussed, only works for set 1, where you've got the subject equivalent to or I, you, we, they itself. However, over here, the subject, observe my dear friends, is my father, which is the equivalent of he. He belongs to set 2, so the treatment of the verb will be governed by the rules of set 2. And in set 2, whenever you have a verb ending with a CH, we provide an ES towards the end of it. So let me just fix that sentence for you. I'm going to add an ES, making the sentence correct, and removing what? Removing the subject-verb disagreement. One more example, my sister wash. Now, my sister wash is incorrect because my sister is the equivalent of she, belonging to set 2. Wash is ending in SH. Again, the same treatment, ES. I add an ES to that, and the sentence is corrected. And finally, the last example, my brother do his work. My brother is the equivalent of he. He again belongs to set 2. Whatever works for he will also work for this sentence. So do is ending with an O, so you've got ES in the end. Let's fix that sentence right away. My brother does his work, turning the wrong into right. So there you have it, friends, the formation of the positive with reference to set 2, and now we can proceed ahead to the formation of the negative in the simple present. Let's go. All right, so on to the formation of the negative in the present simple. Now over here, you can heave a sigh of relief because we're going to do away with all the rules of verb endings and we had to follow in case of the positive. So no more of that s, es or ies towards the end of the verbs. In fact, all you're left with is two simple sentence structures governing the negative, one for set 1 and the other for set 2. Let's have a look right away. So in case of set 1, you've got the sentence structure of the negative as follows. You've got the subject followed by don't, which is essentially a contraction for do not, which serves as your auxiliary verb here, followed by the main verb in the infinitive form. Comparing that with set 2, you've only got one difference, that the don't gets replaced by the doesn't this time. You've got the subject followed by doesn't, which is the contraction for does not, followed by the verb, the main verb, once again in its infinitive form. And yes, that's the one thing which I'd like you to notice over here, that as opposed to the positive, in case of the negative, regardless of the fact that we are working with set 2, he, she, it, the main verb will remain in the infinitive without the use of any verb endings which were s, es or ies. Now let's understand that further with some examples over here. We've got I don't watch soap operas, set 1, set 2, he doesn't watch soap operas. Let's see how that confirms with the sentence structure already discussed. I serves as your subject, you've got don't as the auxiliary verb, and you've got watch as the main verb in the infinitive. Going to the second set, we've got he as the subject, you've got doesn't serving as the auxiliary verb over here, and followed once again by watch as the main verb in the infinitive. A few more examples. You don't seem ready versus she doesn't seem ready. Once again, set 1, we don't eat papaya, and it doesn't eat papaya. And finally, some names in here. Gary and Jill don't work at the bank. Now, why that don't? Because Gary and Jill is the equivalent of they, which belongs to set 1. Hence, the rules of set 1 allow you for the usage of don't. So you've got Gary and Jill don't work at the bank. Similarly, you've got Vincent doesn't work at the bank. Now, Vincent is the equivalent of he, therefore a component of set 2. So whatever applies to set 2 works for Vincent. You've got subject plus doesn't, hence you have Vincent plus doesn't. So you got the sentence as Vincent doesn't work at the bank. So those were some examples showing you the use of the negative in set 1 and set 2. Now, before we move on to the next section, a very important golden rule which I always advocate to my students so that it helps them avoid the subject-verb disagreement, which is if you've got both the main and the auxiliary verb in a sentence, it is always the auxiliary verb taking the impact of the tense, leaving the main verb in its infinitive form. One more time, that golden rule is if you've got both the main and the auxiliary verbs in a sentence, which would ideally or rather always happen in case of the negative and the interrogative only. So you've got the main and the auxiliary verbs in the sentence. It's always the auxiliary verb taking the impact of the tense, leaving the main verb in its infinitive. Now let's see how this works for these sentences over here. Now you don't see much influence in case of set 1. All that is happening to the auxiliary verb do is that it is receiving a not. But you do see a rampant influence of the same in case of set 2, where the auxiliary verb does receive the impact of the tense. Let's see how. Now, a very common subject-verb disagreement or an error that students would commit would be they read the sentence, he doesn't watch soap operas, and perhaps they go ahead and make it, he doesn't watches soap operas, confusing this with the rules of the verb endings only for the positive. Now, what you must appreciate over here is that the auxiliary verb has already accepted the impact of the tense. The auxiliary verb originally was do, which has accepted the verb ending es. So now there is really no need to provide that verb ending to the main verb as well. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that, once again maintaining the grammatical integrity of that sentence. So that is the subject-verb disagreement with relation to the negative in the present simple. I hope you found this useful, and now let's proceed to the next section. All right. Alright, so now on to the interrogative, the sentences wherein we ask questions. Now things are quite simple over here as well. We've got two structures for the sentences, one for set 1 and the other for set 2 respectively. Let's begin with the structure for set 1 over here. So this time we've got the sentence beginning with an auxiliary verb itself, which is do in this case, followed by the subject and eventually ending with the verb in the infinitive form. Now let's compare that with set 2. The same thing occurs over here as it did in the negative. The do gets replaced by the does. So you have the auxiliary verb does starting the sentence for set 2, followed by the subject, and over here also ending finally in the main verb in the infinitive form. Let's take some examples to understand that. We've got a sentence over here in set 1, do I look happy? As opposed to this, in set 2, you've got does he look happy? Let's compare that with the structure already mentioned. Now, do is your auxiliary verb over there. You've got I working as your subject, and you've got look as the main verb in the infinitive form. Comparing that once again with set 2, the do gets replaced by the does, which is the auxiliary verb starting the sentence in case of set 2, followed by he as the subject, and once again eventually ending in the main verb in the infinitive form, which in this case is look once again. Two more sentences to solidify that concept. We've got do you like ice cream? That's set 1, followed by does she like ice cream in set 2. And finally, do we bother you? Compared to set 2, does it bother you? And that's the formation of the infinitive. Now, a word of caution over here. Please do not go ahead and commit any subject-verb disagreement, such as you've got does he looks happy. Do not feel that this is set 2, so you need to meddle with the main verb. That's not the case because this is the interrogative. Does he look happy will remain the right sentence. The reason for that, let me reiterate that golden rule that we've discussed already, that whenever in the same sentence you've got the presence of the auxiliary verb as well as the main verb, it is always the auxiliary verb absorbing or taking the effect of the tense, which in this case has already happened. Originally the infinitive over here for the verb was do, which has accepted the verb ending es. So the result of this, you can let the main verb thrive in its infinitive form, and with that technique you can go ahead and avoid any errors. So that's the infinitive overall. Now, for some better understanding and for some reinforcement of the learning, what I've done is I have put the positive, the negative, and the interrogative in the simple present back to back for better understanding. Let's have a look over here. So we've got the positive in set 2. We begin with set 2 this time. We've got the positive as he goes, followed by the negative, he doesn't go, and eventually the interrogative, does he go? Let's take another set of examples over here. We've got she sees, she doesn't see, and does she see? Finally, coming to some examples from set 1, we've got I walk, I don't walk, and do I walk? Finally, ending with another example from set 1 again. We listen, we don't listen, and do we listen? So there you have it, all the three forms of the sentences put together. Now the takeaway from all this is that A, the rule of the verb endings, that's your S, ES, and IES, only works in case of set 2, that is he, she, it, as you saw in he goes, she sees, and so on. And it does so only in the positive sentence. You see the verb in the infinitive form, in the negative, as well as the interrogative, but you do find it with the verb endings in case of the positive, as with goes and sees. So that's all I have to share about the interrogative. And in fact, with that, we come to the end of the basic concepts. Now, let's go ahead and give this video practical shape by discussing the most common applications of the simple present tense. Let's go. Alright, so now for the juice or the fruit of the entire labor, we discuss the common applications or the simple uses of the present simple tense, all the situations where you need the use of the present simple. So what I've done over here is I have divided those uses into 5 separate headings, followed by a good 20 examples to illustrate the same. Let's start with the first use. We've got routine events or things that take place regularly. Let's have a look at some sentences, and please do make a note of the verbs which I have underlined for your convenience, because all of them are following the pattern of the present simple. The first one being he plays golf every day. It's an everyday activity, hence a routine, so it occurs in the present simple. Similarly, we visit grandma at the weekends. The children play in the park on Sundays, and we close the library at 7 in the evenings. All routine activities happening regularly. A note, however, over here, which is that sometimes you do encounter the routine activities in the present continuous as well. So what's going on over there? Let's discuss. So for example, you'd have something like, we're visiting grandma at the weekends. Now, is that valid or not? Now, what you need to understand over here is that while the present simple is permanent in nature, the continuous, its counterpart, is rather its temporary counterpart. Things only happen to take place. They do take place sometimes on a routine basis, but the routine does not carry on indefinitely. Rather, it ceases after a fixed amount of time. So, if you have a routine sentence in the present continuous, you will definitely have a time marker in the sentence to illustrate that although it's a routine, but eventually it's going to cease. For example, once again that sentence, we visit grandma at the weekends, changes into continuous as we are visiting grandma at the weekends. You will have something following weekends as this month. So it is a routine, albeit only for this month, not beyond that, a temporary routine. So we are visiting grandma at the weekend. Similarly, the children play in the park on Sundays. So again, if this turns into a continuous, you've got the children are playing in the park on Sundays, perhaps nowadays, which again shows that it is only in the temporary present, but does not go on to become a permanent routine. And that's quite simply the change of routine events into the present continuous, permanent versus temporary. Now we come to the second usage, which is fact. Now very quite simply put, whenever you're going to express a fact or a universal truth, you're going to use the present simple for the same reason that the present simple is a permanent tense. Let's have a look. The sun rises in the east, snow falls in winters, his birthday falls in December, they live in Paris. All facts about people, about geography, about seasons, and so forth. So you've got the verbs in the present simple: rises, falls, live, and so on. We come to the third use, which is feelings and opinions. You've got, I love pop music, he feels sick, I don't agree with you, we don't enjoy the winters. So as you can see over here, it's all very simple in the positive. You've got the negative over here. So you've got the auxiliary verb staying in the don't, which again is signifying present simple, followed by agree. Since you've got don't over there, it's a negative sentence. Your main verb stays in the infinitive form. The same thing happens over here. We don't enjoy the winters, and so on. So all those feelings and opinions that people express. And how do they do it? They do it in the present simple. Coming to the second last common use, we've got talking about thoughts, what you're thinking, but not at the moment, some things which you have thought of. So I think she's upset. I think. So you've got a simple present over there. I think she's upset. Then we have, I don't think he likes his new job. Now, once again, likes is your present simple. We come to, I think we should go now. So think and go, you have them again in the present simple. And finally, Amy doesn't think she's ready for this. So Amy is equal to she. So you've got a negative over here. So once again, the impact of the tense falls only on the helping verb, which in this case is do, which turns into doesn't, leaving the main verb think in the infinitive. So Amy doesn't think she's ready for this is all these examples talking about thoughts expressed in the simple present. And for the final common use, we've got in case of future tenses. Sometimes the simple present is also clubbed with the future tense. Let's have a look how. So I'll meet you when you arrive. So you've got I'll doing the job of the future. Nonetheless, you've got arrive over there in the simple present. So that's the future tense as well as the simple present working in tandem. Another similar sentence, we've got we'll decide when she comes. We'll decide is your future, but when she comes is the present simple. Another one, they'll celebrate my birthday when we meet. So they'll celebrate is your future, and when we meet is the present simple. And finally, she'll call me once she gets home. You've got the future right here, she'll call, and you've got the simple present, gets home. Now, a very important note over here, the reason why we are discussing this is to avoid another common error. Sometimes what learners tend to do is they try to introduce the helping verb will twice in a sentence. They'll have sentences such as, I'll meet you when you will arrive. Now, that second will over there is redundant. You do not require that. If you are talking about a future tense and you have a condition following the first clause, I'll meet you when you will arrive is incorrect. Instead, what you're going to do is remove that second will and let the other verb remain in the present simple. I'll meet you when you arrive. Consider these sentences again. You'll see what I'm talking about. We'll decide when she will come. No, we'll decide when she comes. Similarly, they'll celebrate my birthday when we will meet. No, rectify that. They'll celebrate my birthday when we meet. And it goes on in the same fashion. So these are the common applications of the present simple tense. Hope you found them useful, and I also hope these examples were quite handy. And now finally we move on to the advanced uses. So finally, we arrive at the advanced applications of the simple present. Let's have a look. So we've got 6 scenarios over here with examples once again. Let's begin with the first one. We've got future timetabled events. Now, events which take place in the near future can be expressed apart from the present simple, also in the present continuous as well as in the future. So this sentence that you look over here can be expressed as the train will arrive at 8. Also, the train is arriving at 8 because it's the near future, but you can also use the simple present to quite simply express it as the train arrives at 8 because mostly it's a routine too. Nonetheless, if it's going to happen very soon, you may go ahead and use a present simple there. More examples, I start my new job tomorrow, a present simple alternative for I'm starting my new job tomorrow or I will start my new job tomorrow. And finally, we leave for New Delhi next week, a present simple alternative for we are leaving for New Delhi next week or we will leave for New Delhi next week. So that's the first use, future timetabled events, which can be used in the light of present continuous, future, as well as the present simple, as you just saw. We come to the second use, which is series of events. Now, series of events are further divided into 1, 2, 3 categories. Let's have a look at each with an example. So first, you've got demonstrations. Now, if somebody is demonstrating, say, a recipe on the television or in front of you, so they might go ahead and instead of saying the present continuous, first I'm going to take a bowl, they might just straight away go ahead and use the present simple there, such as first I take a bowl and break the eggs into it. So you've got take and break as the verbs in the present simple. Taking the second instance of series of events, you've got commentaries. So let's imagine an exciting scenario in a cricket match. You've got he sees the ball coming, he swings the bat, and it's a 6. Audience go wild over the 6. Yeah. So you've got he sees the ball coming, he swings, and it's a 6. You've got the verbs over there as sees and swings. Once again, instances of the present simple. And we come to another example of series of events. We've got instructions. You want to ask the way from someone, how to reach a place. So you go ahead and say, how do I get to the bank? Notice that get as the present simple, and the reply would also come in the present simple. You take a left at the bank, you go straight, and you are at the bank. So you've got take a left, go straight, all the verbs once again in the present simple. Coming to the next usage, which is quotations, often used, if not always. So whenever you're talking about literature, you tend to use the present simple more often. The reason for that being that literature, once written, becomes an archive, becomes more permanent in nature. So let's have a look at some literature, some popular literature being talked about. So you've got perhaps a a Shakespeare lecture going on. So you all know what Hamlet says about suicide. Says, which is the present simple over there. Speaking about a holy scripture, you do realize what the Gita says about rebirth. Once again, the present simple there. And in the novel, the author says. Once again, some authorial commentary, some notes to a novel, to some literature. Once again, you got says over there, so that's your present simple working for you when you talk about quotations in some piece of literature. We come to another use over here, expressions such as here comes, there goes, and so on. Now the key word over here is just. Such expressions are used when the incident has either just occurred or it's just about to take place. For example, here comes our bus, which means the bus is just about to arrive. So here comes our bus. There goes the train. You arrived at the platform and unluckily, oh, the train has just wandered away. So you get there goes the train. So goes. And here come the police. They're arriving at the scene of crime. So here come the police. Instead of the police are coming, you can also express that as present simple. Here come the police. You just see the police cars arriving. So here comes the police. We come to the second last usage, which is introductory expressions. Sometimes you start sentences with introductory expressions such as I hear, I see, I understand, I gather, another version for I understand. So you meet somebody and you tell them, I hear you have a new job. So I hear, present simple. I see you have a new car. Again, a new discovery whenever you're making discoveries. So I see. I understand you have switched teams. I understand, present simple once again. And finally, I gather you've forgotten your keys. Somebody's groping their pockets for keys, and then what you understand from that is, I gather you've forgotten your keys. So another instance of the use of the present simple. And we come to the final use, final advanced use, which is formal correspondence. All your mails or emails which are of a formal nature. So what do you have? You have introductory lines such as we write to advise you. Now this is on a very serious note. The less formal version would be we are writing to let you know in the present continuous. Another example, I enclose my check for $200. Another formal writing, the less formal version, I'm enclosing my check, and so on. And finally, you've got, I look forward to hearing from you. So I look forward to hearing from you, a formal version of the less formal alternative, which is, I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And with that, we wrap up all the advanced usages. Very handy for exam purposes, I hope. So that's the wrap up with simple present. I hope you found this presentation useful. If you have, please go ahead, like, share, and subscribe. We'll be working on more tense videos. Until then, keep supporting, keep watching. Thank you so much.